Well, good morning, everybody. This is William Murdoch. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. You know us as MORPC. Thank you for joining us for the Regional Housing Strategy event. Now, for those of you who don't know us, MORPC is Central Ohio's regional council for 75 local governments. We help communities work around the region and provide services and advocacy on transportation, sustainability, data, planning, and direct services to those who are in need. Helping position Central Ohio for a better quality of life as we grow is what we do. There are few issues more pressing to our future than housing, and this is an issue that cuts across the region. Rural, suburban, urban, we are all in this together, and that's why we're here today to talk about the regional housing strategy and what we've learned and what we're going to do. Today, we build on the efforts of so many of you with the release of this strategy. This comprehensive report addresses the critical issue of housing in Central Ohio like never before. It allows all of us to take action to do even more as a region, and it recognizes the unique issues of communities, big and small, with solutions that are connected to what they need and what helps the region. And today you're going to learn about its findings and actionable recommendations and hear the perspective of community, nonprofit, and business leaders in the region, and a compelling national perspective that's going to challenge us to do even more. Now, when we kicked off the regional housing strategy a year ago, we never imagined how critical the timing would be. COVID-19, economic crises, and protests have changed our perspective, but as you'll learn, they've only intensified Central Ohio's urgent housing needs. And it's focused additional attention on racism and equity. These things deeply affect our housing situation. We have all witnessed and felt the sadness, the outrage, and the frustration brought into tragic focus this summer. It's brought new urgency to this effort to redouble what we're doing to explore and tackle the long legacy of racism and its impact on housing here in Central Ohio. And we hope you'll see clearly how the regional housing strategy reaffirms our commitment to inclusive and equitable housing approaches. We believe Central Ohio is poised to emerge stronger from today's crises than before, and we think housing can be a big part of the platform for equitable growth and recovery. Why do we think this? Because this is the first time Central Ohio has taken such a broad-based collaborative approach to address housing production and affordability. This is not just a planning exercise, but it's a call to action with informed, ready-to-go strategies. The regional housing strategy has identified and quantified our biggest challenges and has over 100 action items, including an interactive online dashboard with resources and metrics to ensure that we're moving in the right direction. So you're going to learn a whole lot more today, but I want to jump to the top 5 action priorities for the region as identified by our effort. These things will be tackled in the next year, and we're ready to get started on first, adopting green tape development review processes. Green tape development review means removing regulatory barriers, often resulting in lengthy process and increased costs. Simple, more efficiency means lower costs, providing more opportunity to build more affordable types of homes. Second, provide more tenant-based rental assistance. This is the biggest gap in our region's funding strategy. We need more assistance to address housing instability across the region and better access to information to help us sort through options. Enact source of income protection laws. These can make a big difference in removing barriers to housing. It can protect tenants region-wide and mitigate risks for landlords. We can't do this alone without the state's help, and that's why we think we need to create a state housing tax credit. More development gap financing is needed to fill the gap to get projects done. And last, pilot diverse, lower cost housing products. We need and want to foster innovation in housing design and construction. This will increase the number of homes that can serve a wider range of ages, abilities, and households. If we really want to provide options to everybody, we need to ensure this happens, and we need to make sure we're building mobility into our planning and we're thinking creatively about zoning. So that's just a start to the actions ahead. But before moving on, we need to say thanks. And I want to thank all of our project sponsors and the advisory board for their passion and hard work on this strategy and the new ideas and flexible thinking they brought. You've all done this incredible work for so many years, and we have over 24 communities, business leaders, foundations from around the region supporting this effort. We couldn't do it without them. I want to thank my team at MORPC, Kirsten Carr, Jennifer Knoll, the project lead, and of course our consultant team led by Enterprise. They put their heart and soul into making this project happen. And I'm also grateful for the leadership of MORPC's leadership, our chair, Karen Angelou of Gahanna, Vice Chair Eric Janis of Franklin County, our recent chair, Rory McGinnis of Columbus, who kicked off the effort, and our secretary, Mayor Chris Emmerich-Screams from Dublin. Thank you for their leadership. And thanks to all the people who provide service across the region and devote their careers to housing every day. I say this because our own team at MORPC works with our most vulnerable families in the region every day. I'm so proud of them. They work so hard and have such an impact. So to you, we know you, we value your hard work, and it's so critical for the region. We owe you our thanks, but we also owe you a strategy that builds on your efforts, and I hope you see that today. So let's get started. With that, I'd like to turn things over to a friend of MORPC, Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther. And we all know Mayor Ginther's been a leader in the area of housing, and the strategy wouldn't have gotten very far without his support and encouragement and his challenge and the support of so many on his team. So thank you for that, Mayor Ginther. Please go ahead. We're pleased to have you here.
Good morning. Thank you, William, and to all of our partners that are part of the announcement here today. We're excited to be here. The great folks at MORPC, our great advocate on City Council, Councilmember Shayla Favor, Dr. Dixon, Commissioner Boyce, Christy Angel, Michael Wilkos, and we're thrilled to have a great author who's going to provide some incredible insights this morning, Connor Doherty. I want to thank all those who participated in some way to the regional housing strategy, whether they are other local governments, developers, real estate, financial institutions, nonprofits, and so many more. This wouldn't be possible without all of us coming together. The regional housing strategy being unveiled today provides data that reflects the ongoing and continued disparities for minorities and vulnerable populations who are seeking safe, decent, and affordable housing options here in Central Ohio. There's a clear need for other municipalities to increase the resources they offer to support affordable housing. To affect change, it must be a regional effort. And that's why I'm so excited that we have so many of our suburban neighbors and adjacent counties that are part of this effort. We know that communities that are leading the country and the world are doing so because they're acting regionally. And that's why I am so excited about this work. To drive economic growth and meet our region's prosperity goals, those set forth by our economic development, public-private partnerships of formerly Columbus 2020, now One Columbus, it's critical that the public and private sectors engage in this conversation.
There he is. Oh. We apologize. We're having some technical difficulties. Mayor Ginther, did we lose you?
Sorry about that. I think we had a little hiccup. We appreciate the regional housing strategies effort. Was a collective effort grounded in data. From the start, equity has been a key goal of the strategy. This goal was put in place before the current national dialogue was underway, so we're well positioned to pivot from study to implementation in a meaningful way for our region. We know the time for planning and study is over. The time for action is now. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by New York Times reporter Connor Doherty. Connor definitely has an understanding of the housing crisis. Over a 2-decade career, Connor has covered a range of topics, including banking, entertainment, and sports, but he is mostly focused on economics and housing. He joined the Times in 2014, and in that capacity wrote his award-winning Cramped and Costly series. This series ultimately led to his book titled Golden Gates: Fighting for Housing in America. Connor lives in Oakland with his wife and 2 children. We're very excited today to share his insights and perspectives. And we couldn't ask for a better facilitator of this conversation than Columbus and 10 TV's own news anchor, Yolanda Harris. Yolanda, thank you so much for joining us and facilitating this conversation with Connor this morning. And I'll turn things over to Yolanda.
Yolanda, please remember to unmute your mic and turn your camera on, please. Connor, please unmute your mic and turn your camera on as well. Please bear with us as we go through these technical difficulties. Connor, I see you now. Yolanda, are you able to turn your camera on and unmute yourself? Please stand by. Thank you, Connor, for joining us this morning all the way from LA. We really appreciate it. If everyone will just stand by, Yolanda Harris will be joining us for the conversation with Connor.
Okay, there we go. We're good. Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Okay. All right, let's go. Okay, I think we got it. Thank you. Had my husband be my assistant. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Connor, let's talk about the book, Golden Gates. It centers around the housing crisis in San Francisco, and the subtitle of that book is Fighting for Housing in America. And that makes it clear that this is not just a problem in the Bay Area. So how are you seeing the challenges?
Why does he have his camera on? Mayor needs to turn his camera. Okay, they're turning it off.
Yolanda. So is Yolanda there?
I am. Did you hear me? Can you hear me?
I did. Somebody else. Anyway, can you see me? Can I see you? I can't see you, but anyway.
I can see you and I can hear you.
Housing is what I like to call. Okay, cool. Housing is what I like to call a local national problem. And what I mean by that is a lot of our problems are the same. and a lot of them have to do with local policies, and are really within our own capacity to make huge progress on. Every city, every region has suburbs with a lot of low density development. Every region has, as the intro showed, every region has costs that are rising much faster than incomes, which is putting a huge squeeze on people. Obviously, the lowest income bear the brunt of that. And every region is increasingly having a homeless problem. And of course, this varies from place to place, but it's becoming a bigger issue everywhere. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can fix this without the federal government. You talk to any mayor, any government, any local government official of any kind, and they will tell you, if the federal government gave us more grants, or we built public housing like we used to, or better transit funding, we could make a lot more progress on this. Housing generally, things is very tied into the federal government. We can't just ignore their role. But there's all sorts of things that we can do locally between zoning. They mentioned a tax credit before, public-private partnerships. There's all these sorts of things we can do regionally, and those things can make a huge impact on the problem. And what I think is kind of inspiring about that is we don't have to sit around waiting for who's in Congress, whether we like them or not. We don't have to sit around thinking that our housing, our ability to make progress on this relies on who's in the White House. I think those things can help, like I said, but ultimately, so much of this is within our own power. And so I think that it's inspiring to think that, while it's troubling to think that it's a local problem, it's also inspiring to know that we can make huge progress on it.
Okay. Now, as you point out, housing and more broadly land, it's complicated, very complicated. There are pushes and pulls and competing interests within the system that make any single or rigid solution unlikely to work. However, mixed solutions, mixed ones, could feel like a cop-out. So what has your research shown about how a mix of strategies could be a better approach to solving the housing challenges?
So, yes, as you said, housing is super complicated. I was just reading, one of my goals for the summer was to read The Power Broker, which is this famous book about New York City. And at one point he says, there are often 5 sides of a housing issue, and there are often 40, which, I thought really captured it, that, a lot of people have different perspectives when you start talking about you want to build anything. And, if you start talking to people, they're all pretty valid. I think one thing, let's just kind of take a step back for a moment. Housing is not a widget. You can't really make it, meaning you can make housing, but you can't really make land. I mean, you can do landfill and stuff, but basically you can't really move it, right? So unlike food or some other kind of market-based commodity, we really don't have the ability to kind of take surpluses here and move them here. We're really just kind of like left with what we have. And of course, what we have is near schools, near roads, near all these other things we have to do as a region. And so this kind of proximity of housing, the fact that lots of people want to be in a particular school district and there's only so much room. Lots of people want to be, in a rural area, but one that is kind of close to the city. By definition, there's not that much room for that, right? So there's all these decisions we have to make with land that are so finite, and that just adds to the complexity. And so that, I think when we talk about why it's complicated, it's important to remember that's why it's complicated, because it's this good that's that's defined by its proximity to things, and it's also very limited. But back to now, we have 2 problems, as you guys outlined at the top. One is that there are some people who can't afford anything that the market is building. Now, this is because of construction costs and all these kind of issues that every region is dealing with. And as I said, with mixed solutions, there's no real way to start to make progress on that other than to find it out, to find some way to bridge the gap between what they are making and what housing costs. This is, like you said, subsidies, tax credits, all these other things have to enter into that conversation. But we also are making it difficult to make that housing affordable to begin with. I noticed your first action item was green tape, which I assume was a play on red tape. And I think what we're really to do is to different kinds of housing and different kinds of housing types. Yolanda, by the way, am I coming through okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. And different kinds of housing types. I mean, if you look at, there's really, wherever you are, there's really just kind of a lot of, a lot of cities have these kind of glass condo towers and glass apartment buildings. Those are very in vogue right now. And then a lot of suburbs have just a bunch of single family homes that look somewhat uniform. And that's kind of all we got. But I think that as we start to kind of move forward on this problem, we might start to see row homes, which we used to see in the past. I was driving through Los Angeles last night and I started to see a lot of them, newer row homes. And I thought to myself, well, that's something I don't see built a whole lot anymore. What are called accessory dwelling units or kind of cottage houses in the back of your home. Those are becoming more popular now. And I think that when we talk about more housing and building more density and making it more efficient to build our housing, this immediately leads to an impression in people's minds of a skyscraper. But I really don't think that's what's going to solve our problem. And in fact, there's a lot of bad things to say about skyscrapers. Somebody once referred to vertical sprawl. So anyway, my point is, I think that we need more subsidies, a mixed solution for people who can't afford housing, but we also need to be driving towards figuring out types of housing that just can be affordable without a whole lot of programs associated with it.
Okay. What you broke up there a little bit, figuring out what types of housing, what did you say right there?
Well, what I meant was that we need to come up with programs to bridge the gap with what people can afford and what's available, but we also need to be really working hard, both on the public and private side, trying to just make things cheaper to begin with so that they are within the reach of more people. Understanding that some people will, because of the wages, will never get there, but there's a lot of ways we can make housing more accessible to middle-class people without subsidy.
Okay. Now in Ohio, as in California, policies put in place decades ago, they have had lasting effects on the way our communities look right now today in terms of design and who lives there. We just talked about that a little bit. Here in Central Ohio, people of color, especially Black residents, are disproportionately impacted by these policies in various ways. We're talking they face greater housing cost burdens and eviction rates, unfair lending practices, higher rates of poverty, and lower access to opportunity. Can you give some examples of the housing experience for communities of color and or low-income families in the Bay Area?
Yeah, so this is, after all this talking about local, maybe I need to shift federal here for a moment, which is that we did something called redlining, a horrific policy, and we're living with it today, both in terms of wealth and segregation. And a lot of people, I'm sure, here are familiar with redlining, but it was basically federal guidelines that basically said Black people cannot get the same loans as white people. That decision, that single federal decision, can explain huge amounts of our wealth inequality. It can explain huge amounts of how our regions all look. And it's something whose legacy we have to inherit and grapple with. And one of the things about the built environment that's so difficult is once you start etching policies in concrete and you know, you can't just change them overnight. You know, there's so much people live in those communities now, and so I guess what I would say about that is what we need to do is be mindful of the fact that that these policies are things we have to start undoing. And if we're going to start undoing them, I guess I kind of just come back to these mixed solutions, which is the first thing. We need to make it easier for people to live in all sorts of different kinds of neighborhoods, which means building more housing types in those neighborhoods. Otherwise, we will just end up using wealth as a race neutral way of still creating segregation. But we also need to be, I think, focused on tenants and figuring out ways to keep tenants stable in their homes. I mean, one of the things I always talk about is, Yolanda, are you there?
I see you. You went out, then came back. There you are.
One of the things I always talk about is when you think about what it's like to be a homeowner in America, you're subsidized in a lot of ways that you don't appreciate. You get this huge mortgage write-off. Your government ensures that you get a 30-year fixed mortgage. You know, you really get a lot of stability. I mean, when you go to a bank and you buy a home with a 30-year fix, which is what most people do, you know your house payment, other than your property taxes, will never change. I mean, just think about the security associated with that. Renters do not get that. And if we believe that stabilizing people in their homes so that they can, you know, become active in their churches and their public schools and their neighborhoods, if all that stability leads to a better society, if we believe that, I think it's wrong for us as well. Role and
Okay, save that because you're breaking up right now. We don't want to miss it.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yes. Your video's
Okay,
frozen,
so
but we can hear. Oh, there you go. There you go. Yes. So back up just a little bit what you were saying.
Try not exactly. So I don't want to go too deep into rent control and all these different things, but I just ask people to sort of consider, think of all the security you get as a homeowner, specifically with a 30-year, you know, the knowledge that your payment will never go up and the family planning you can do around that. And think about how destabilizing it would be to you if it just moved or if it just went up sometimes, you know, by an amount had very little ability to predict, and how destabilizing that would be for yourself, your family, your ability to keep your kids in the right school, build friends, build relationships. So I just think that we need to start thinking about ways that we can extend that stability to renters.
Okay. Now, as a follow-up to this, I know you mentioned in your book a story about a community that came together to fight the pressures of gentrification. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the things I really wanted to do was capture a building and see how it turned over with all this pressure. You know, so there's a region of the Silicon Valley, though it's just a suburb like any other place. And there's a small apartment building there that looks probably like an apartment building in Columbus, Ohio. It's got the kind of metal rails on the outside where you can see people walking between the units. You know, kind of that standard cheaper apartment build has been workforce housing, some people call it. And so that's what the place looks like. It's a 2-story place with, I think, 20 units. And the landlord bought it and raised the rent $800 on this family. And this 15-year-old girl comes home one day and finds a note taped to her door, basically says your rent is going up $800. Now she's 15. She's got no real knowledge of organizing or any of these things. I mean, she had been involved in a few things, but she goes down to her local community center and basically tells, it's run by a Catholic charity, and she tells the guy running it, who's kind of Coach Raphael, they call him, and he and they start organizing, and they protested the landlord. They got a lawyer, a nonprofit lawyer, And they, you know, there's months and months, and there's this whole story, and this 15-year-old is really, because in her community, she's the only one with sufficient time. Her mom works like 80 hours a week, cleaning houses and taking care of elderly people. And ultimately, they got a buyout deal, which is where the government, or sorry, the landlord says, essentially, I'll give you $1,500 if you leave now, quietly. And what was interesting to me is that so I went wanted to meet who moved there, and what the reason is so much belief that that would be a higher income family, that the gentrification was happening. But what it actually turned out to be was another lower income family that had stuffed about, I think, 7 or 8 people into what had a 2-bedroom apartment that had previously had 4. Now, even when it had 4, they had a bedroom in the living room, and pretty crowded even with 4. You put 8 in there, and I walked into the house, and it was like there's this one room, there was like 2 bunk beds against the wall, then a bed against it. You couldn't really get to a bed without climbing over a bed. And this is something we see all around the country, because people are pretty logical, right? Like, most people are not going to become straight up homeless. They're going to find a way, and that way, for generations, for however hundreds of years, has always been just crowd into what's there.
Right.
And as we've learned with COVID, this is incredibly dangerous. I think that what this anecdote illustrated is not just the pressures of gentrification, but how, and this is, I'm sure, something Ohio is grappling with as well, how precious affordable housing is. So here are 2 families looking at housing within their budget, and that's not even particularly affordable. It's just less than the total amount of money they make in a month. And when I look at a lot of other places, you do see a higher end apartments that are, but in this apartment, there are still so many people looking for affordable housing.
Right.
There are that needs.
And it's hard to find all over. Connor, I'm going to wrap this. You're freezing up, and I'm out of time anyway. So I want to thank you for taking your time to talk to us and explain a little bit about your book and go into these issues a little more. Right now, I'm going to send it to the president and CEO of YWCA Columbus. I know this lovely young lady. She's fabulous. Christy Angel.
Hello, Yolanda. It's good to see you. It's been a while since we've run into one another in some of our favorite places, but maybe after the pandemic, we'll pick that back up again. Thank you to both you and Connor today for a great conversation. You've shed light on housing on the national level, and it's interesting to see how many commonalities in housing and the housing issues and barriers exist across the country. And obviously the similarities, we never think about similarities between California and Columbus, but those similarities with respect to housing do exist. And when you were talking, we definitely could see how Central Ohio is not unique to our challenges. I think sometimes we think, we're unique. We are only experiencing these, or our experiences are very specific to our community, because we do have some complexities here. So thank you again for shedding light, Connor, and thank you for joining us. Yolanda, thank you for being a part of the conversation. Now, I am excited today to introduce my good friend. We've known each other for a long time. We've worked in some of the same places and been working around most of these issues for most of our career in many different ways. Michael Wilkos. Michael is the regional, he's not the regional vice president. He is the senior vice president of community impact for United Way. Michael has a wealth of experience. Many people in our community know of his work, in particular around the Wyland Park community and the housing conversations that took place there, and the work that he did to help address some of the issues of poverty and equity in that community, but also in his work at the Columbus Foundation. When Michael was the director of community research. And during his tenure at the foundation, he initiated, led, and managed more than $9 million in a competitive grant process to support the holistic revitalization of Wineland Park. And so prior to joining the foundation, Michael served as senior director of neighborhood impact at United Way. And of course, we're happy to have him back at United Way. He's kind of a boomerang kid, as I was in some of my previous roles. Michael does great work. And has really been very, very engaged in housing for a long time. And so we look forward to his presentation today. Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Christy, and big appreciation to the MORPC team for giving me the honor of putting this important work into context. I love that you called me a boomerang, Christy, because I'm also a boomerang where I live. My very first apartment in Columbus 31 years ago was on 9th Avenue, and now I own a home on 9th Avenue. So my joke is in 3 decades, I haven't gotten very far in Columbus since I'm still on that same street. So I am going to take over the screen here, hopefully without any challenges, and walk us through a presentation on this work. Sorry. And I will look to the leadership of someone here to tell me when you can see my screen. Are you able to see my screen now?
Not yet.
Okay. Are we there?
Now we can see it, Michael. It's perfect.
Great,
Thank you.
Okay. We are all learning new skills in this world. So again, I will put into context what is a incredible piece of work. So this is where I grew up. For more than 20 years, I lived in the same house. My mom and dad bought this house in 1973. They paid $174 a month the entire time they lived there. The neighborhood I grew up in suburban Youngstown, had about 300 houses, all built in the 1950s. Every single home in the community was a homeowner, and there was zero diversity. The entire community was white. So when I moved to Columbus to attend the Ohio State University to study urban geography, Black studies, and then a Master of City and Regional Planning, that was not my orientation. One of my first jobs in Columbus was here. It was an apartment complex in Northeast Columbus, about halfway between Northland Mall and Easton. This was 1989, and there were about 350 units in this apartment complex, and I worked 30 hours a week while I went to undergrad. And at 21 years old, as a college student, there's a lot of things I just didn't know. And what I was told in this apartment complex, which was about 40% white and 60% African American, I was told by the property management company that when I was assigning people to units, I should put white people near the rental office. Because when other white consumers would come onto the property, they wanted those white consumers to think that the property was more white than what it was. And then I was also instructed that on the rental applications that I would take, I was supposed to put a tick mark inside the R on the top of the application, so the main office knew the race of the person that was applying for the apartment. And this didn't feel right to me, but at 21 years old, growing up where I did, what did I know? But I did take it upon myself to call the HUD office at the corner of Chestnut and High and let them know what I'm being told to do. And the person there said, "Are you?" Because I was going to quit because I thought this is just wrong. I didn't know it was illegal, and they told me it was illegal. And they said, "Are you willing to stay on the job and keep a log of everything that you're told to do?" And I said, "Absolutely, I am." And I was terrified because every day I thought all the other people knew that I was this, spy. I mean, I thought I was creating something worthy of a, John Grisham novel or something. But it was disheartening because when I came to Columbus, I thought Columbus was a very different place than Youngstown, and it was a land of opportunity, and it was a land of equity and equality. And that childhood fascination with this city, of course, just was a little naive. I love this quote from American journalist and Chicago Tribune contributing author Sidney Harris, who said, "Our dilemma is that we hate change and love it at the same time. What we really want is for things to remain the same, but get better." And this is the challenge we have. We're a growing region, and our growth has been accelerating. And that growth is shifting. If you look over the last 4 decades, the percentage of growth that is occurring in Franklin County has dramatically increased as demographics and preferences around housing typology has shifted. Let's talk about that. As Connor said, this is the new vertical sprawl of America. These are 3 residential projects right now proposed for downtown Columbus that get a lot of attention. And we have these projects, 2 of which are now under construction behind COSI in the Franklinton area. And we also see things like this on Summit and High Street and West Broad and Long Street and King Lincoln. We see large projects happening in urban neighborhoods. But we also see this, right? Bridge Park in Dublin in the top right and Grandview Yard in the bottom left. All over the metropolitan region, we're seeing higher density, mixed use, more walkable projects. And for many of us, we see all of this progress, and this is the narrative that we've constructed. That growth and prosperity are the same, but they are not. And for many of us, by the way, who come to Columbus from Dayton and Toledo and Akron and Cleveland and Youngstown, which is where much of the American-born in-migration is coming from, we see construction and we believe everyone's doing well. Well, the regional housing strategy is going to dispel that myth. As William said in the opening, that housing strategy is a very detailed report, and I have chosen not to walk through 111 potential action items in the report, but there were several things that really spoke to me that I want to pull out before I put into context what the regional housing strategy means to me personally and what it specifically means to my neighborhood, because I wanted to put that personal touch on these very detailed technical recommendations. And these were the core housing issues that came up in the report that spoke to me. There's increased competition. There's barriers that limit access. We have a limited supply. There's housing instability, and there's not enough housing typology that meets the rapidly changing demographics of our society. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this space to create a more equitable region. We have a critical scarcity of available housing stock right now in this metropolitan region, the likes of which we have never seen before. And this was shocking to me when I read this in the regional housing report about our multifamily building permits. It was interesting that there are these periods of low production, high production, low production, high production, low and high. And if you look at that most recent low production that came between 2005 and 2012, that was a really long period of underproduction. But even the peak years, we have been not building enough housing for our region and its growth. We have been chronically underbuilding apartments, condos, and single-family homes for 9 consecutive years. And it has squeezed everybody. And the appreciation of home values and rents are occurring in Franklin County, unlike any other county in Ohio, because our county is driven by population growth, or our region. Our region has added 220,000 people since 2010, and the rest of Ohio has lost 65,000 people. No other region, other than the 25-mile radius or so around Broad and High, is experiencing this housing crunch in the same way. And our rental market now has the lowest availability since 1970. I picked this image, by the way, of Google Satellite, for those of you that like to play around with images. This is Sawmill Road at Case. This is in Columbus, but Dublin Schools. That is an affordable apartment complex to the top right, Abbey Church, market rate apartments to the bottom of the screen, and single family home ownership units to the top. This is a great example that shows how awesome it is that I live in the city of Columbus, which is 220 square miles. It's in 10 different school districts. It's in 3 different counties. And this is a great example where Columbus land use and zoning, in my opinion, Columbus land use and zoning was great because it enabled higher density housing and affordable housing to be built in additional school districts. In this case, it's Dublin. And that has provided a number of households that struggle with choice of neighborhoods, school districts, and typology in other places in Ohio where school district boundaries and political jurisdictions might be coterminous, or where the city itself might be a small land area or might not have buildable land, doesn't have this same opportunity that we have been given because of this large land area of our city. This is one of the pieces of the regional housing strategy that hurt my heart. And that was this sample of folks that were seeking mediation in eviction court in 2015. And imagine that less than half of our households are headed by female, and only 21% of Franklin County is African American. But the disproportionality of who is getting evicted in this community is very, very skewed. And despite the work and the laws and the protections of the last 55 years, the reality is we have not achieved our fair housing goals the way that we would like, because our housing market is in fact very highly racialized, as is every market in the country. So I love to use this slide because it puts into perspective what happened to our economy going back to 2008. You look at 2008 through 2010, those yellow bars show the number of people who are economically disadvantaged, and the red dot shows the unemployment rate. And every recession recovery in American history until this one resulted in those yellow bars beginning to drop within the second and certainly a third year of an economic recovery. The recession came to Columbus later. It didn't go as deep. The recovery came sooner, and we produced an incredible amount of jobs. But unlike other recoveries, we didn't start to see those yellow bars drop. And economists that help inform the work at United Way have said to us that here's what's different. For this community, the stuff I showed, earning at 200% of the federal poverty level, or that's 412,000 people eligible to be funded by a United Way nonprofit, and we have 80 nonprofits in this community that are working in basic needs and student success and strong neighborhoods and helping people get good jobs. And the reality is the strong economy is no longer working. This is not Columbus's fault. It's not Franklin County's fault. It's not the business's fault. This is a structural change in the American economy where so many people are now working in call centers and distribution centers and as contract workers, and they're just not making enough money to meet expenses. Let's move into opportunity. I love using the Kerwin data. It is laden throughout the regional housing strategy to help us understand our community. It looks at these 4 broad categories, 17 indicators, so we can look at opportunity as a bundle. We can collect this data, we can map this data, and we can say, hey, how are we doing as a community? Here it is. A map on the left is Franklin County. The map on the right is urban Columbus. The darker the color, the greater the level of opportunity. And what we see is that not all of us are living in equally high opportunity places. But if you look at that map on the right, you can find Bexley to the far right. That very sharp line is the Near East Side and Parsons Avenue that runs past Children's Hospital. This, by the way, is the opportunity map created about 10 years ago. And you're going to see an updated version where you're going to see that light yellow between downtown and Bexley, and the insert on the right is starting to change as that neighborhood, like other neighborhoods in urban Columbus, are starting to experience rapid increase in high-income households, or what we will refer to as gentrification. But this is that opportunity map with race. The map on the left is the Asian population, the map on the right is the white population. Each dot is sized according to the size of that racial group. And what you clearly see if you focused on the map on the right, The vast majority of white folk in our community live in the highest opportunity neighborhoods. And what OSU created with these maps is that place matters. And where you're born and where you live are really the determining characteristics as to whether or not you're going to finish high school, whether or not you're going to get a good job, be a victim of crime, or even develop diabetes, right? Neighborhoods matter, but so do race. This comparison I find really fascinating. The map on the left is the Hispanic or Latino population, which has jumped 137% since 2000. And the map on the right is the Black or African American population. I wanted to focus on the map on the right. 70% of the African American population is living in the lowest opportunity neighborhoods. And what you can also maybe see as the African American community moves up the economic ladder, those suburban communities in which that population is usually choosing is Westerville, Gahanna, Pickerington, and Reynoldsburg, because that is the radial direction in which that community is currently located. So let's to my neighborhood. Here's Wineland Park. It is 2 census tracts to the west of Interstate 71. You can see this very crisp line that runs north up the map. That is the railroad track that hugs Interstate 71. If you zoom to the bottom of the map, you can see that are now in between downtown Columbus and Bexley, where a decade ago, all those neighborhoods were in the pale yellow. You're also starting to see movement in the northern end of Linden, or what I would call North Linden, maybe the Kenmore Park area, Linden Park, which has a very different housing typology than, say, South Linden. Why does Wineland Park look a little different than the rest of the areas surrounding it? This is the historic around 1940 aerial of my neighborhood. That's the OSU or the Ohio Expo Center to the north of this picture. Again, you see those railroad tracks. Interestingly enough, North 4th, North 5th, and North 6th Street never had restrictive covenants for race, which is why Wineland Park has stayed a mixed race, mixed income neighborhood for a long time. But let's unpack Wineland Park. This is the street behind where I live. This is what it looked like when I moved into my home 12 years ago, moving back onto the same street I started on 31 years ago. And Wineland Park was very much still a struggling neighborhood as recently as 10 years ago. This is obviously what many people think of for Wineland Park, which had a very challenged history around gangs and violence. Unfortunately, this picture, 2 blocks from my home, was taken just about a month ago, as we have had 6 unfortunate shootings in the neighborhood recently, as many other communities have been dealing with what is an unbelievable set of circumstances in 2020. And we're hopeful that this trend does not continue. Here's the aerial of where I live. It's a neighborhood of 4,500 people. That's Ohio State University to the top. And I'm going to unpack what the regional housing strategy looks like and means to this little neighborhood. This is Community Properties of Ohio. It is a Section 8 housing portfolio. They have 57 buildings in my neighborhood, a little over 300 units. I think I saw Hal Keller on this earlier. An unbelievable appreciation to the Ohio Capital Corporation for Housing and Community Properties of Ohio. I live right across the street from one of these CPO row houses, and to Connor's point about the need for this kind of typology as an affordable housing, when I moved into my home, it was before CPO renovated. They have subsequently renovated, and when my friends would come over my home, they would ask me, how much are the condos selling for across the street? When I would tell my friends that those aren't condos, that's Section 8 housing. But the quality and care and design of what CPO has done, the window boxes, the landscaping, the railings, set a standard that if the most vulnerable people in the neighborhood, which the majority of these are single-headed households, many of which are 21 years old with young children, if they can live in high-quality housing, we should all be able to live in high-quality housing. Another example, the home there with the hydrangeas in front is a Habitat for Humanity home. 8 years ago, when Habitat for Humanity wanted to demolish 7 homes in the neighborhood owned by the city's land bank, all of which were abandoned, 5 of which had been set on fire by arsons, Habitat came to the neighborhood and they wanted to build 7 homes. The neighborhood wasn't having it. and the neighborhood was trying to block Habitat. In fact, when Habitat first asked for permission, it was 18-0 to stop the home you see in this picture. The original version of this home didn't have that porch. It didn't have that peaked roof or windows that look the way you see here. And what the neighborhood said is, drop that house in between existing homes and let's see how it looks. And it didn't look right. Habitat received a grant from the Columbus Foundation to raise the foundations, put on a full porch, which was the defining characteristic that determines the architectural typology of this neighborhood, is that Jane Jacobs, eyes on the street, death and life of great American cities, social interaction, and whether or not you're rich or you're poor, you need to have a porch. The roof line got raised, and Wagenbrenner Development, now Thrive Companies, lent their architect to Habitat to make some facade improvements. And I was terrified as a resident that I thought my neighbors were hiding behind facades and porches and spindles, and they were in fact, it was about race and class. When they came back, the house was approved unanimously. And now these homes fit in perfectly. Here's another example of vacant lots in my neighborhood. The federal NSP program resulted in home ownership units throughout the neighborhood. About 30 of these were constructed, new builds or renovations. This is an example. The home on the left is $450,000. The house on the right is $450 a month. You cannot tell the difference between the affordable housing and the market rate new builds that have been scattered throughout the neighborhood. What's important? People come into Island Park, they think they see gentrification, they're making a mental model and a judgment about what they think the income is of people who live in the housing. Because they see high quality housing, they assume those housing consumers are all market rate, and it just isn't true. This is a industrial site in the neighborhood, 37 industrial buildings. The buildings were still standing when I moved into the neighborhood, thanks to the city of Columbus. These buildings were demolished, environmental remediation came in. Then the city of Columbus spent another $8 million on top of $3 million in demolition to spend $11 million to say, we think people are going to move into a neighborhood they've been escaping for 60 years. This is the market rate housing, one of 4 different product lines. These homes have sold rapidly and are selling for in the mid 400,000s on a former factory site next to a railroad track in a neighborhood that is still dealing with violence. And this is an example that Connor brought up. The neighborhood has changed so quickly. This is a market rate new build built by a young couple that's about to start their family. You see the detached garage. They have chosen to build a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, living room, kitchen rental unit above their garage as an income, but they believe that the mother-in-law will eventually move into the home when that's the right choice for her. This was last night. This was the housing committee meeting in my neighborhood. And it was about 60 people showed up. We were hearing proposals from 2 developers to build very high density housing. This was the first time the community was hearing these proposals. This is what we heard. Both of these projects, about 125 units an acre, both of these were approved on the very first meeting because this neighborhood is about making sure these development projects are not slowed down by a public input process. And I'm proud of how the neighborhood has handled this project. This is a home by Pearl Penn on 5th Street. This was one of there were 11 abandoned homes on this block in 2010. This home was between 2 vacant abandoned properties. The woman who owns this home had been there for 40 years. She could not get homeowners insurance because of the dilapidated condition, and both homes on either side of her were abandoned, both of which had been set on fire. She received a home repair grant funded by the Columbus Foundation, JP Morgan Chase, and Campus Partners. She is one of 80 homeowners that is able to stay in the neighborhood in a revitalized home. And she spoke at the dedication of the Habitat for Humanity home next door by saying she never thought she could live long enough to see her neighborhood return the way it was. I'm going to quickly wrap up. History matters. This is the redlining map. Connor talked about redlining. Everything you see there in pink was the worst tier neighborhood, meaning the federal government had a policy to deny credit to those neighborhoods. This is more than 80 years ago. Ohio State University created the map on the right. This was 2010 during the recession. Everything in the dark color actually shows where credit was being denied here. This is the geography of where we're losing our babies to infant mortality, and it aligns with those historical and the denial of credit from the private sector. Some of these areas have infant mortality rates that mirror developing nations. This is that opportunity map. The darker the color, the greater the level of opportunity. Each dot shows where a shooter or the victim was a teenager. This is Legal Aid Society heat map. A lot of this is evictions. It may be other issues. You can see Linden, the Near East Side, the South Side, Hilltop. This is where people were living right before they went to jail. And guess what? You can find that railroad track running north along the city. You can also see Bexley in the light color. And here is Mid-Ohio Food Bank. Food pantry use looks just like every other map, and it ends in this. This is Are you there, Jennifer?
Hi, Michael.
Right. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction and also for really setting up this conversation with such a compelling narrative. Yes, it's data driven. At the end of the day, this data represents actual households, and so it's a very compelling story. In just a few minutes, we're going to talk with 5 bold and action-oriented leaders who are doing housing work right here in Central Ohio. These women have been engaged with housing-related issues in a variety of ways, and we're grateful to have their involvement on the panel this morning. First, I'm just going to set the stage for that discussion with a little bit of context. We're going to talk about what is a regional housing strategy and really to underscore Michael's message of why does Central Ohio need one. So we'll bring up the slides here in just a moment, I think. Yep, thank you. So the regional housing strategy kicked off last year with a goal to create a coordinated housing strategy for Central Ohio that provides investment and policy recommendations to support our communities and our growing region. And as William mentioned in his opening remarks, and as we've heard throughout the event this morning, we just happen to be doing this work at a very critical time. COVID-19 has radically altered public and private resources, and it's shining a bright light on social justice and racial inequality. This presented an opportunity for the regional housing strategy, though, in that we were able to pivot with our stakeholders and address these disparities through perhaps an even stronger equity and recovery lens. Through the process, stakeholders told us that they envision a future for Central Ohio where growth and recovery help realize more equity among Central Ohioans, not less. Housing, where it's built or maintained, who it's for, and how it's priced, can be a platform to achieve this vision. MORPC served as the project coordinator and provided staff support throughout the development of the regional housing strategy, and we were very fortunate to work with an excellent consultant team led by Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise is nationally known for their work in housing, particularly affordable housing. We worked specifically with their technical assistance and research team, which is based in their Washington, D.C. office, but we also had a group of local consultants who brought that local expertise and knowledge to the team. Ice Miller led the financial side of this project. Rama, with their engagement experience, guided our community involvement efforts, and Vote Strategic Insights led their decade of market analysis work to assist with our analyses. Equally important to this process was the role of our stakeholders and community leaders. Between the project sponsors and advisory board, the regional housing strategy was guided by nearly 100 regional leaders representing over 50 organizations across public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors. Additionally, we heard from many others throughout this process via surveys, workshops, and interviews. So we've talked a lot about it, but what exactly did we produce through this process? So the work of the regional housing strategy ultimately culminates in a dynamic online housing resource hub. There's a hub and a dashboard where you can find tools that will help you identify and address housing issues right within your community, along with a one-stop shop where you can track the region's progress toward key regional metrics. Additionally, an implementer's toolkit provides a user-friendly way to search through a menu of over 100 potential actions. These are structured and searchable by community, housing submarket, housing-related issue, or by the action itself. A financial investment portfolio documents existing and potential future funding sources aligned with the actions in the toolkit, and users can also find 25 unique case study examples from around the country. A big next step in this process is for MORPC to begin working with our local government members to develop local housing action agendas. These will use the data and analyses of the regional housing strategy together with community input to identify the most appropriate actions to move forward at the local level. So you saw this image toward the beginning during William's opening remarks. This is just one of the resources you will find online at morpc.org/RHS. The Implementers Toolkit is dynamic, it's user-friendly, and it's adaptable to your needs. And just like the regional housing strategy itself, the Implementers Toolkit is designed to grow and flex as the region grows and priorities change. We invite you to spend time exploring this tool to learn more about the unique submarkets that make up Central Ohio's housing landscape and the actions that could be implemented to move the needle on housing supply and affordability. Everything you need to get started is online now, and we're going to be adding more resources to the website in the days ahead. Soon we'll be including a final report that documents the process over the past year. This report is not necessarily for implementation, but we certainly invite you to check it out. And so with that stage set, let's go ahead and bring in our panelists, all of whom represent communities or organizations that have led their time and their talents toward developing the regional housing strategy. What I will ask for each of our speakers, I'm going to introduce you in alphabetical order. As I introduce you, if you would please unmute yourself and turn on your cameras if you haven't already. We're going to start with Dr. Kirsten Carr, Director of Planning and Sustainability at MORPC. And Kirsten's department provides and promotes collaboration, technical assistance, and regional planning initiatives relative to active transportation, the natural and built environment, transportation safety, and energy to benefit MORPC members and communities in Central Ohio. Dr. Talisa Dixon, Superintendent and CEO of Columbus City Schools. Dr. Dixon returned to Columbus City Schools in March of 2019 after 5 years leading the Cleveland Heights University Heights City School District in Northeast Ohio. Dr. Dixon has been recognized nationally for her work in promoting educational equity, including in 2016 when the U.S. Department of Education honored her and the Cleveland Heights University Heights School District for fully reflecting America's diversity at the highest levels of K-12 schools by equally including students of all backgrounds in advanced placement and international baccalaureate courses. Councilmember Shayla Favor with the City of Columbus. Councilmember Favor was appointed to Columbus City Council in January of 2019, and prior to joining council, Shayla served as an assistant city attorney for the City of Columbus. In that role, Councilmember Favor implemented the Vacant and Abandoned Property Program and the Receivership Program, both of which have effectively helped to decrease the city's vacant and abandoned property count and to put once blighted properties back into the housing market. Next on our panel, we have Commissioner Christiane Schmenk with Union County. Chris is in her first term as Union County Commissioner and includes chairing the Union County Affordable Housing Task Force among her responsibilities. She's also attorney with the law firm of Brickler & Eckler, where she assists businesses and communities with economic development, legal, and consulting needs. Commissioner Schmenk's past titles include Director of the Ohio Development Services Agency and elected Mayor of Marysville. And rounding out our esteemed panel this morning, we have Stacy Glenn Short, Senior Vice President and Corporate Community Development Program Director for Huntington Bank. And as the Community Development Director at Huntington, Stacy is primarily responsible for developing and implementing community partnerships and programs, as well as monitoring the bank's performance. Stacy is the past chair of the Consumer Bankers Association's Fair and Responsible Banking Committee and is a member of its Community Development Committee as well. So welcome to all of our panelists. It is so nice to see you this morning. We are going to start just to kind of give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and your organizations to everyone this morning. If you would briefly discuss your community or the organization that you represent and talk about why housing or regional housing strategy in this case is so important to your work. And Kirsten, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
All right, happy to do that. And good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be on this panel with these amazing female leaders and to kick off the implementation phase of our regional housing strategy. And Michael, you did an amazing job with this presentation. And as Jennifer said, kind of bringing it to life, the data to life. William introduced earlier MORPC in his remarks, so I'll keep it brief. And I just want to remind everyone that we have a rather diverse region, but with an amazing membership of local leaders who deeply care about their residents and really understand the need for more and better housing in a growing region. And it was wonderful to see how our region as a whole, including our private and nonprofit sectors, had come together to tackle the issue of housing. Jennifer had the opportunity to write an article for this week's news a few weeks ago, and she pointed out something rather basic, but something that I think we need to be reminded of. And I know Connor kind of shares the same sentiment in his book as well. So besides air, water, and food as our essential pieces to life, we need shelter. So shelter should not be a privilege. And yet across the country, we are struggling to find housing solutions for people to match their incomes. Housing is truly a critical piece to make our region successful. Michael mentioned it, we are a growing region. We are on track to become a region of 3 million people. And as we're growing, we need to make sure that we have a more diverse housing portfolio that makes us more resistant to shocks in the market. And what we're experiencing right now with COVID-19 is just a great reminder of the vulnerability of our housing market and also the vulnerability of our policies. And so I'm excited to talk more about this and hear from all of you and make changes happen.
Thank you, Kirsten. So we start with the regional perspective. Commissioner Schmink, you represent a county level of government. Talk to us a little bit about why housing is so important to Union County.
Sure. Thank you. And it's wonderful to be with you all today. I'm also so excited to be experiencing the rollout of this study. Housing issues in my county, Union County, and we're just northwest of Dublin. They're somewhat different than maybe inner core Columbus, but they're very real. And over the years, we've realized we are part of the Central Ohio region, and trends in other parts affect us and vice versa. And if we all want to be strong, it's working together that will make us stronger. So about a year and a half ago, March, we had John Melkai, who's with the Builders Industry Association, come and present to a large group of us in our county. And that was kind of my aha moment. What we heard from him is, if you look at the year 2050, Central Ohio will need more than 14,000 housing units per year. And our current rate of new building starts is only 8,000. We also heard that our housing costs have far outpaced the growth in our region's median incomes. And so we won't be able to afford to live in those houses. In our county specifically, we're a rapidly growing area. We always kind of enjoy our little competition with Delaware County, who's growing the fastest. I think we're ahead right now. Our population is only about 60,000, but it's growing rapidly, and particularly the southern part of our county that then blends into Dublin and Columbus. And specifically, what we heard from the BIA is that our annual housing starts are currently only about half, 50% of what we'll need to stay with that growth projected for 2050. I also heard that for every job that we will be adding, and we are experiencing rapid job growth, which is a blessing. We have great companies located here, Scotts Miracle-Gro and Honda and Nestle and a lot of other ones. But for every job that we add, we need to add a housing unit. And so there's that direct correlation between how do we keep our economy strong if our workers can't afford to live here. And we also heard what our median housing prices is for what I think of as kind of used homes. It's in the high 200s right now. For new builds, it's the high 300s into 400,000. And then apartments are not affordable. We've heard from our essential workers that work for our police and fire departments and our schools that they can't afford to live here. So we formed a housing task force that Jennifer mentioned. It's kind of a working group of all sectors of our local community. And we hold our meetings about every other month, and we really learn. That's what a lot of it has been, was learn about how can we get more intentional on housing development and what are our options, and then how do we educate the public and how do we educate members of boards that can affect housing, really what would be a healthy way to grow our housing. And we were so excited to be a sponsor of this MORPC study because the timing coincided with our work. And, we really know that we will learn so much from the study. So my pleasure to be here, and thank you, MORPC, for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that tees up nicely if I turn to Stacy next, because we talked a little bit about the financing piece, supply and demand issues. Representing Huntington Bank and the banking community today, Stacy, would you be willing to talk a little bit about how Huntington interacts with the housing community and how a regional housing strategy might impact your work?
Sure. So just for those, I think everyone knows who Huntington is, but Huntington was founded in 1866 and we're headquartered here in Columbus, but we serve 7 Midwestern states. So I actually find myself very blessed to be able to learn about housing programs and strategies across, a wide variety of rural, urban, different states. So I think probably one of the things that I'm most excited about is just, the approach that has been taken with putting this plan together. As was mentioned by Connor and Michael, affordable housing is a critical role in creating a strong community. And so I really do believe that as banks, we play one of the integral roles in helping move the strategy forward. So I'm very excited to see where we go next with the strategy overall.
Thank you. Councilmember Favor, as we continue to draw down from the regional to the county, now let's talk about the municipal level and the city's involvement with housing. There's been quite a bit lately, and the city's been involved in this process as well. Can you talk a little bit about what that relationship looks like and how you might use this strategy going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thinking about where we're at, and I have to acknowledge that Michael and Connor really did set the stage for why it was important for us to engage in a regional strategy as a way of addressing our housing crisis. Just as a note, the city of Columbus is home to over 900,000 residents. And as Connor and Michael have stated, we continue to grow, right? And so this unique approach to studying our specific situation in this region is incredibly important. So in terms of process, the fact that we were able to join together so many different organizations, county and city level, in order to do this work was incredibly important, just in the spirit of being able to tackle such a huge problem like this. In Columbus, evictions have long been a concern of not just mine, but many of the housing experts that we work with on a daily basis. And the findings continue to support that sentiment. So here we are with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has only exacerbated that problem. And we have to continue to find ways to keep families safely and stably housed, not only during this pandemic, but every single day. So we have begun to implement rental assistance programs that have been acknowledged in the rollout of the MORPC strategy. And there has been some movement with the courts and their processes, once again, which is a nod to the rollout of the strategy as stated by the MORPC study. But we must take the next step in eliminating evictions when families aren't able to pay due to low or no wages at all. This problem, as Michael stated, primarily impacts women of color and their children, and that is an inequity that we must continue to work towards resolving. We're simply just not building enough units. And it seems like there are new projects that are coming online regularly, but it still definitely is not enough to meet the demands of our community. Another way that we intend to use the rollout and the points as acknowledged by the strategy, is that when you think about NIMBYism, not in my backyard communities that aren't accepting all types of development and are preventing new opportunities for affordable housing, I see this study as a strategic way of us continuing to educate our residents of the importance of really looking at the approach to meeting the demand of our housing shortage and making sure that we're able to efficiently assist residents in their most in their time of need.
Thank you, Council Member. And then finally, last but not least, right, we have Dr. Dixon. And Dr. Dixon, I can't help but reflect as we sit here this morning, thinking about a focus group that Kirsten and I had the opportunity to do with you and several of your fellow superintendents in this process. And we were really struck by those critical relationships, some of which we may not think about right away, between housing and community development and schools and the needs of a school district. And so I'm really very interested to hear your thoughts on how the regional housing strategy might be leveraged within the school district and what you see your relationship between the district and the strategy to be.
So thank you again. This has been the conversation has been so enriching, and I feel so hopeful. As you know, we're the largest school district in the state, and we service over 51,000 students. So we have a big job, and we have to make sure that our students have stable homes. 6,000 of our students are considered vulnerable youth. And they are students who live in homeless shelters, they have temporary housing concerns, and we have to make sure that our students are in stable, nurturing homes as much as possible. We are now implementing a new curriculum this fall. We want those students to have access to those curriculums in the homes that they live in, because we know we have a transient populations, our students are moving. And so it was so important that we didn't have curriculums that were different curriculums across the district. We wanted to make sure that students learning, no matter where they live, that was not a new set of curriculum was not being introduced to them because of their challenges of their home stabilization. So that was important to us. So we have developed a regional strategy in the district. So we divided the district up in 6 regions, and in each of those regions we have network supports. So part of that, we wanted to make sure that libraries and rec clubs and all of those pieces were there for our families. I even went on a helicopter ride with the mayor. I said, I want to see the city. Let's see the city from an aerial view, so I know where our libraries, where our rec clubs, how do we make sure that families had access if we divide the district up into regions. So housing is so important. We want our students and our families to be able to have stable residence. And I appreciate the city, what they've done so far to help with this strategy, excited about the work to be done. And how that's going to help us with our students in Columbus City Schools.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. You know, each of you has been involved in this process in different ways, and we're so grateful to that involvement for sure. And I think where I want to be able to wrap this panel up today is really asking you to tell us, what is your call to action for the audience? What are you or your organization or community committing to? What is your call to our audience here today? So Stacy, let's come back to you to start from Huntington's perspective. What's the bigger call here today?
So I think for me, one of the most important pieces of the strategy is that it was a holistic approach, because often in the communities that I work in or learn about, there is one single need identified, and that need is focused on, and it ends up creating a ripple effect of gaps. So you fix one problem, but create another problem. So what I think is most important about this is continuing those conversations. So as we roll out strategies, ensuring that we're having conversations with everyone who would be impacted by that strategy or in that community, and bringing all the potential partners to the table to hear about what the plans are. I think that's probably the greatest way in making certain you engage all the private and public organizations that are in that community to see what they can bring to the table. Because even as banks, you might think, oh, they'll provide loans, but there's so many different things that a bank can provide in each of these different strategies that I think having those conversations again to revisit what's going to be happening in that community will help open up opportunities for others to join in and bring their resources to the projects.
Great point. Thank you, Stacey. Commissioner.
Sure. I loved what Stacey said. Maybe to add to that, one thing I would challenge us all is to be intentional about how housing develops. And I speak from my past in economic development, where housing was really seen as a different bucket, and economic development focused only on jobs. And I have come to realize you can't have one without the other, kind of back to what Stacey said. All of these things have to be there for our region to stay strong. And so let's think of this as a hugely important part of keeping our region strong and be very intentional about how we go forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Favor, I'll turn back to you.
So for the past several months, I've been hosting housing calls with various housing partners from across the city. I've committed to that group that I will continue to look at policies and improvements in the areas of fair housing and racial equity. My call to action would be for everyone to stay engaged in this process and to hold one another accountable. I have committed myself to leaning in with our partners all across the city, both private and nonprofit, to figure out what else I can continue to do in this space. We need our residents and additional stakeholders to do exactly the same. We can't allow this work to get lost, and we do need everyone involved to achieve the goals of our region.
So true. Thank you. And Dr. Dixon, I'll turn to you next. And I believe you might be muted.
Okay.
Dr. Dixon, we may still have you on mute. I'll turn to Kirsten if you'd like to go next, Kirsten, then we'll come back to Dr. Dixon to close us out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so appreciate that we're having this conversation today. And I know we could go, another 2 hours. It's just such a complex topic. And talking about our high eviction rates and more than 200,000 households being housing cost burdened, to the policies and programs that make it more difficult to build diverse and cheaper housing, to the disproportionate impact on our African American and our most vulnerable low-income families. There's so much to unpack here. And obviously, if it were easy, we wouldn't be here today and we would have solved it by now. But as someone else on the panel had said before, I'm really hopeful because of the engaged and collaborative process that we had so far. But I wouldn't be MORPC if I didn't have two specific call to actions to our local governments. So the first one is, as a local government, as a developer, bring in the service providers who hear the lived experiences, try to understand the barriers through the lens of the people who live them every day, and include them in the design process as you're trying to figure out new solutions for homes and neighborhoods, because they might already have really good ideas. And when we talk about zoning and policies, many of the aspirational goals that are set forth in the report, they can't happen until we make some basic changes to policy. So the development community wants and the need to be at the table for these conversations. I'm really encouraging MORPC members to reach out to the builders and the developers to work together to find ways that make the development process more efficient and essentially leads to more homes and more affordable homes.
Thank you, Kirsten. And to Dr. Dixon to close us out.
Yeah, thank you. I want us to be reminded, that we have 51,000 students who are coming with hopes and dreams and aspirations, and their families are looking to education being the key to their students' success in their future. Having students have good homes and living and where they live is so important to that work. A place to study, a place to be connected, a neighborhood to be connected, friends, etc. Those experiences that many of us had is so important to our students' future growth. We know our students are resilient. You know, they're going to come back to us starting September 8th in a virtual setting. But those relationships, and I think they start with our communities and our homes. So let's not forget that. I advocate for those 51,000 students and their families every day. Just don't forget that our family, you know, the home life and where they live, it's so important to our students having a good experience not only at school, but at home in their neighborhoods. That is so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Great point to end on. Now I'll invite our MORPC Executive Director, William Murdoch, to join me in a virtual round of applause for our wonderful panel today. Thank you. William, I turn the mic to you to close us out.
Great. What a panel. I'm so inspired by all the presentations, but this closing panel, we're talking about people's lives and their quality of life and how we can be a better community. Thank you. We are all in this together. So this is the collaboration and the innovation that we've seen throughout this whole study with the incredible effort of everybody, schools, developers, builders, nonprofit organizations, communities of all sizes. And that advisory board and community leaders built this blueprint for Central Ohio, and it gives us a path to tackle really difficult challenges with good solutions as a region. We believe we can remove barriers to housing so every resident can really exercise their right to decent and safe housing in neighborhoods of their choice and provide more and better options for essential workers, seniors, and families. We all have a role in this. Now, at MORPC, our role is to keep us focused on implementation. We'll be here to support and cheer you and advise you with best practices and objective information. We're also here to help us hold all accountable as we track the region's progress. And I know our team is especially looking forward to using the toolkit to develop local housing action agendas with our fellow community leaders and business leaders. I know there's great calls to action from the panel. If you've been following the chat, I encourage you to read the one by Sandy Doyle-Ahern of EMH&T. I couldn't agree more. We have so much to do. We got to get going to do even more to really tackle this challenge. But if I can leave you with these closing things I'd like you to do, first, get involved. Your community, your business, your nonprofit is a part of the housing solution. I want you to review the strategy. All the critical pieces you need are up to date. There'll be more coming in the next week. I want you to engage in that implementer's toolkit and see all of these solutions and strategies and how you might help your community or your organization put them to practice. And last, if we really want to be effective, we have to do the right thing and lift up strategies to help those who've been left out. Redouble your commitment to infusing equity and tackling racism in your housing efforts. You heard this from Connor and Christy and Michael on the panel and so many others. If we really want to be the most prosperous region, this is our biggest obstacle and it's our biggest opportunity, and I'm committed to all of you that MORPC's redoubling our efforts to do the same. So this event doesn't signal the end, but it's the beginning of our work. If we're all in this together, we can really accomplish some big things. So with that, thank you. Thank you to my team for putting this together. Thank you to our speakers and our panelists and Project Funders Advisory Board and everybody who's working on housing every day. Thank you. We're looking forward to what's next. Have a great morning.